Hello, welcome back to my channel. Here is Dr. Saeed Adnan Atar Bukhari. Today we are going to discuss a very important topic in the contemporary international politics, and that is Israel-Hamas War. That is an offshoot of the broader Israel-Palestine conflict. So today we will discuss that how this war erupted, and it is not the first time that the war has happened in this broader Israel-Palestine conflict. There has been a history of the intermittent violence that has occurred in various periods of time. So we will discuss and trace about the causes of this conflict, what we know as the Israel-Palestine conflict, and what can be the possible solution to reach a solution or agreement to particular conflict resolution of this particular problem, so that we can bring about a lasting and sustainable peace in the Middle East. The overall Israel-Palestine conflict has seen a recurrence of violence at different periods of time, particularly with support from United States of America. Israel has resorted to the use of violence and use of force to suppress the genuine calls for the right of self-determination and the right of self-government to the people of Palestinians. The recent Israel-Hamas war from 2023 to 2025 has resulted from a violent activity that we know it as the Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, that was carried out by Al-Qassam Brigade, that is a violent militant outfit of Hamas, a organization in Palestine, and they basically the Hamas people, they carried out a use of force, guerrilla tactics to basically infiltrate into Israel on 7th October 2023. It resulted into around 1,200 Israeli deaths and capturing of around 250 captives of Israelis. The operation, what they call it as Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, that has revived and galvanized the movement of Palestinian liberation, though the means that they were employed were illegitimate. However, it invited a ruthless response from the powerful Israel that has repudiated the international humanitarian and human rights laws and resulted into indiscriminate and disproportionate use of force. Up till now, as we make this video, there are around 46,707 Palestinian killings, including 18,000 children. So in this video, we will try to review this Israel-Palestine conflict by applying a model of Edward Azar. That model is known as the protracted social conflict for conflict resolution. And also we will apply the Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs to assess the root causes of this particular conflict and provide recipe for conflict resolution in this Middle Eastern conflict. The recent ceasefire in Lebanon and Gaza resulted into a temporary ceasing of the use of force in the region temporarily. However, the underlying causes of the conflict still remain. A genuine and lasting peace in the Middle East and Israel and Palestine area, lies in the two-state solution. The cause for the Palestinian statehood cannot be repudiated for long by the ruthless use of force by the Israelis. The authoritative and arbitrary use of force is the breeding ground for another manifested conflict in the future. Therefore, the conflict resolution needs to be adopted through meeting the genuine demands and genuine needs of the Palestinian, that is their right to have the self-determination. The Israel-Hamas War of 2023-2025 has reignited another cycle of violence in the Middle East and rejuvenated the debates of the Israel-Palestine conflict. The war has resulted in the devastating number of deaths and unmatchable destruction in the contemporary international politics. The war was initiated as a consequence of a militant activity when Izzaduddin al-Qassam Brigades, a violent group of Hamas, a Palestinian organization, launched a deadly attack known as the Al-Aqsa Flood on Israel on October 7, 2023, killing around 1,200 Israelis and taking more than 250 hostages in custody. Around 800 to 1,000 Hamas, along with Islamic jihad militants tore away the Gaza fence border in 119 places, entering Israeli occupied lands by flying powered paragliders and firing around 5,000 rockets. Around 6,000 people crossed into Israel from Gaza, a tiny territorial enclave where 2.3 million Palestinians are sealed off by an Israeli Egyptian blockade for 16 years since the Hamas takeover. These attacks were carried out in the backdrop of the developments in the last couple of years, including the increased Israeli settlements in Palestinian lands, displacements of hundreds of Palestinians, and intermittent clashes between Israel and Palestinians around the Al-Aqsa Mosque in between 2021 and 2023. The attacks aimed to trade the Israeli hostages as a bargaining tool to get free thousands of the Palestinian prisoners, including women and children captured in the Israeli jails without a trial or charges. The Israeli counteroffensive to disrupt and dismantle Hamas led to widespread use of force and terrible damage to the innocent Palestinians. The Israeli Defense Forces have launched an urban warfare to root out Palestinian militants, mainly Hamas, once and for all. Israelis' retaliatory strikes have involved ground offensives, aerial strikes, bombings of the hospitals and schools, target killing of the UNRWA for Palestinian refugees, humanitarian aid workers, and journalists. Israel has been not only using the conventional use of force but also involved in the cyber attacks in shape of the pager attacks and also using the artificial intelligence based Lavender system and carrying out intelligence based operations to target the top leadership of Hamas and Hezbollah. Notably, Israel's counteroffensive led to the killing of the top tier leadership of these organizations, including Hassan Nasrallah, Ismail Hania, and Yahya Sinwar. The Israeli offensives resulted in more than 46,000 Palestinian deaths, including 18,000 children. The war not only remained limited to the Gaza border or Gaza territorial area, but it has spilled out into Lebanon and also broader Middle Eastern regions. The recent US brokered Israel-Hezbollah 60-day ceasefire deal in November 2024 and also a deal in January 2025 is under stress as both sides resort to the violence. The war continues with no ending in sight in the near future. Though the conflict has temporarily stopped with the ceasefire, the recent ceasefire that has happened, however, the conflict continues with no end in sight in the near future. So, as I told that this Israel-Hamas war that has happened in the recent past, this is not the first time that the violence has erupted in the Middle Eastern and the Palestinian region. But historically, this conflict, this dispute has its origin many decades ago, or I would say it dates back to a century-old conflict. That in this particular series, I will explain that what is the origin and the background of the conflict. So the genesis of the Israel-Hamas war can be found in the overall Israel-Palestine or Arab-Israel conflict. This conflict is a complex and multifaceted struggle with deep historical, religious, and political roots. The Palestine issue has been one of the core issues of the politics of the Middle East that has been a boiling cauldron of the clashing cultures, political, ideological rivalries, and conflicting interests throughout the ages. Therefore, it is significant to assess the origin and causes of the conflict. The genesis and origin of the conflict can be traced back to the late 19th and early 20th century. We have got competing national aspirations, territorial disputes, and external influences linked to this particular conflict. Religiously, the land of Palestine has been a sacred and holy place for the people of three Abrahamic religions, the Jews, Muslims, and Christians. So we see that how and why these three religions, the people of these three religions, associate this particular place. The Jews considered Jerusalem as a spiritual site where the religion Judaism has begun, and the two great temples had existed once. It holds a significant value in the biblical narratives and the Jewish history. The Jews have a very old claim over the land, and they call it as the promised land from God for the Abraham and his descendants. Based on these ideological adherences, the Jews claim to live and rule this piece of land. The Muslims, they also place a high value to Jerusalem because of the existence of Al-Quds, that is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, their first Qibla, earlier direction to offer the prayer before now Kaaba in Mecca. The Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, also visited Jerusalem during his night journey and ascension, that is called as the Isra and Miraj. If we look at the Christians, as per the Christian belief, the Jesus was crucified and ultimately rose in Jerusalem. Therefore, they pay respect to the place. So this piece of land, what we call it as the Palestine or Israel-Palestine, is a land that has been occupied and ruled by various people, including the Persians, the Romans, and the Muslims. Particularly, if we talk about the Jews were repeatedly uprooted by various people like Persians, Romans, and the Muslims, who allowed people from all faiths to access the Holy Land. The Jews were dispersed out of Jerusalem after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE and started living as migrants around the world. Persecution of Jews, particularly the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe, including the Holocaust in the 19th and 20th centuries, led to the foundation of the Zionist movement in 1896 by Theodor Herzl, who founded the World Zionist Organization. This political movement called for a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine, what they call it as their promised land. So while the Britishers were in dire need to get support against the Germans during the World War I from 1914 to 1918, they promised a piece of land for the Jews in Palestine if the Jews would support the British. The Jews agreed to it under the Balfour Declaration in 1917. Under this declaration, the British pledged the Jews to carve out a separate state for them in Palestine. During the war, the Britain took control of the region in 1917 by defeating the Ottoman Empire. In the post-World War I, Palestine fell under the British mandate or British control. When the League of Nations formally granted Britain the mandate over Palestine on July 24, 1922. As per the promise to the Jews, there was a huge influx of the scattered Jews in Palestine who started purchasing land from the absentee landowners, large resident landowners, government, churches, foreign companies, and flahin or the farmers, and building settlements in 1920s and 1930s. In the late Ottoman period and the British Mandate period in post-World War I scenario, that is around 1922 up till 1948. Conversely, the British had made a parallel pledge to the Hussein of Mecca. As per the McMahon-Hussein correspondence, in which Sir Henry McMahon, the British High Commissioner in Egypt, and Sharif Hussein bin Ali of Mecca agreed to the terms in which the Arabs led by Hussein would revolt against the Ottoman Empire in exchange for the British support for the Arab independence after the war. Simultaneously, during the World War I, in 1916, the British, in connivance with France, decided to alter the geographic configuration of the Middle East as per the Sykes-Picot Agreement in the post-war scenario. This agreement concluded into key territorial divisions of the Middle East with France controlling Zone A, that include northern Levant and Syria, whereas the British would control Zone B, that include Mesopotamia and Palestine. The plans created resentment in the Arab world. The Arab leaders felt betrayed due to these alteration plans. The indigenous Arab Palestinians conceived these developments as imperialist designs of subjugating them, and thus they initiated a broader Arab nationalist movement. This struggle turned into an intermittent cycle of violence between the Arabs against the Jews and foreign rule of Britain and France, turning into riots and revolts in 1920s and 1930s. By 1930s, the world plunged into another war, World War II, from 1939 to 1945. The Jews bore the brunt of the anti-Semitism of Adolf Hitler during the war that resulted into the Holocaust, that is, killing of around 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany. Amid the Jews' persecution, thousands of them moved to Palestine during 1945 to 1948. The Arabs retaliated to this particular move. A particular development happened in July 1935 when the Peel Commission, also known as the 1937 British Royal Commission, recommended the first ever partition of Palestine as a solution to the growing tensions between the Jews and the Arabs under the British rule. During the World War II, the matter remained unresolved. However, once the war ended in 1945, the matter was placed into the United Nations General Assembly. The British found that their mandate was unworkable, and therefore they placed the matter to the United Nations. Influenced by the British promise to the Jews under the Balfour Declaration and rising discontent and unrest by the Arabs, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a partition plan that is known as UN General Assembly Resolution number 181 in 1947, that proposed the division of Palestine into two separate states of Israel and Palestine, and keeping Jerusalem as an international city as per this particular map that I am showing. This plan was acceptable to the Jews, but it was rejected by the Muslims and the Arabs that see that particular proposal as unjust. Differences over the UN-led plan resulted into uprising and rising tensions between the two conflicting parties. These uprisings ultimately led to growing escalation, and within these tensions, Israel, or particularly the Jews, they declared independence on May 14, 1948. Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Egypt, along with Saudi expeditionary forces, they launched aggression the very next day, leading to the First Arab-Israel War of 1948. The Palestinians, they resisted to this particular Israeli move. The Palestinian resistance was brutally crushed by the newly established Israeli state that led to a widespread catastrophe, what we call it as the Nakba. This Nakba or catastrophe resulted into huge number of refugee crisis, resulting into displacement of around more than 700,000 Palestinians. The Palestinians were pushed into camps, limiting them to around a tiny territorial enclave that we call it as the Gaza, between Egypt and Israel, and also to the West Bank bordering Jordan and Israel. So historically we see that this is basically the history or genesis once this problem has originated. If we look at this broader Israel-Palestine conflict, we can divide the Israel-Palestine conflict into 14 distinctive phases. In this particular series now, I will explain that what are those 14 phases, distinctive phases in which Israel-Palestine conflict has evolved, and it has basically witnessed recurrence of violence over the period of time. Thank you.